May 8th, 1945. New York City trembles beneath the sound of celebration. Paper falls like snow between skyscrapers. Sailors climb lampposts. Factory workers embrace strangers in Times Square. Church bells ring across the Atlantic world. In London, crowds surge toward Buckingham Palace. In Paris, tricolor flags reappear on balconies once draped in swastikas. And in Moscow, artillery salutes thunder into a night sky still scarred by smoke. Victory in Europe. The war against Nazi Germany is over. For millions of Americans, the moment feels decisive. The arsenal of democracy has prevailed. The beaches of Normandy are secure. The Rhine has been crossed. The enemy has fallen. Yet beneath the jubilation lies a quieter arithmetic. 27 million Soviet dead. Entire cities erased across Eastern Europe. Vast armies that bled for nearly 4 years before an American soldier set foot in France. In the streets, no one debates percentages of sacrifice. But history will. Did America win the war in Europe? Or did it inherit the credit for a struggle already decided elsewhere? Before judgment can form, the world must return to where the storm began. September 1st, 1939. German forces cross into Poland at dawn. Armored divisions move with mechanical precision. The Luftwaffe strikes rail hubs and airfields within hours. The strategy is new. Concentrated armor, close air support, rapid collapse. Within weeks, Poland is partitioned between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union under the secret protocols of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. Europe's fragile balance, already weakened after the First World War, fractures completely. By May 1940, the Wehrmacht turns west. Denmark falls in a single day. Norway soon after. Then the German army drives through the Ardennes forest, bypassing the heavily fortified Maginot Line. France, long considered Europe's strongest land power, collapses in 6 weeks. Paris is occupied on June 14th, 1940. Britain stands alone. The summer skies above southern England become a battlefield. The Battle of Britain marks the first major campaign fought entirely by air power. German bombers seek to break British resistance. Fighter squadrons of the Royal Air Force respond with radar-guided interceptions. Cities burn during the Blitz, but Britain does not surrender. Across the Atlantic, the United States watches carefully. Officially neutral, deeply divided. President Franklin D. Roosevelt understands that a German-dominated Europe would threaten global balance. Yet American public opinion remains shaped by the trauma of the First World War. Isolationism is powerful. Still, quiet preparations begin. In March 1941, Congress passes the Lend-Lease Act. The legislation allows the United States to supply military aid to nations deemed vital to American security. Britain becomes the primary recipient. Weapons, trucks, aircraft, food, fuel. The material arteries of modern war begin flowing across the Atlantic. Then, on June 22, 1941, the war expands beyond imagination. Germany launches Operation Barbarossa, the largest land invasion in human history. Over 3 million Axis troops cross into the Soviet Union along a front stretching nearly 1,800 miles. The objective is clear: destroy the Red Army, seize vital resources, and eliminate Bolshevism. The scale is unprecedented. Entire Soviet armies are encircled in the opening months. Hundreds of thousands are captured. Kiev falls. Smolensk burns. By autumn, German forces approach Moscow itself. But the Soviet Union does not collapse. Industry is dismantled and transported east beyond the Ural Mountains. New divisions are raised. The winter of 1941 slows the German advance. The front stabilizes, but at catastrophic cost. While the Eastern Front consumes millions of soldiers, the United States accelerates industrial mobilization. Shipyards expand along the coasts. automobile factories begin converting to military production. Aircraft output rises month by month. Even before formally entering the war, America is becoming its industrial backbone. Yet officially, the nation remains at peace. That fragile distance will end in the Pacific. December approaches. December 7th, 1941. The sun rises quietly over Oahu. At 7:48 a.m., the silence breaks. Waves of Japanese carrier-based aircraft descend upon the U.S. Pacific Fleet anchored at Pearl Harbor. Battleships burn in the harbor's shallow waters. The USS Arizona erupts in a catastrophic explosion. More than 2,400 Americans are killed in less than 2 hours. The attack is precise. It is devastating, and it is strategic. Japan's objective is not conquest of Hawaii. It is time to expand across Southeast Asia and the Pacific before American industrial strength can mobilize. Within hours, the United States is no longer a distant observer of global war. It is a direct participant. On December 8th, President Franklin D. Roosevelt addresses Congress, calling it a date which will live in infamy. War is declared on Japan. 4 days later, Germany and Italy declare war on the United States, honoring their Axis commitments. America now faces a two-ocean conflict. The decision that follows shapes the war's entire trajectory. Despite public outrage against Japan, American and British leadership agree on a Germany-first strategy. Nazi Germany is judged the greater long-term threat. The defeat of Hitler becomes the primary objective. Even as the Pacific War intensifies, the United States begins mobilizing on a scale never before witnessed. In 1940, American aircraft production stood at roughly 3,000 planes annually. By 1944, it exceeds 96,000 aircraft per year. Shipyards construct Liberty ships in assembly line fashion, some completed in under 5 days. Between 1941 and 1945, the United States produces nearly 300,000 military aircraft, over 88,000 tanks, and more than 2.5 million trucks. Factories operate around the clock. Women enter industrial labor in unprecedented numbers. The phrase, arsenal of democracy, once rhetorical, becomes literal. But production alone does not win wars. Logistics does. The Battle of the Atlantic becomes the first prolonged struggle involving American forces against Germany. German U-boats prowl shipping lanes, targeting convoys carrying food, fuel, and munitions to Britain and the Soviet Union. Early in 1942, U-boat attacks along the American East Coast sink hundreds of vessels. Coastal cities witness oil tankers burning offshore at night. Gradually, Allied countermeasures improve. Radar, sonar, code-breaking at Bletchley Park, long-range patrol aircraft, and convoy escort systems reduce losses. By mid-1943, the Atlantic Sea lanes begin tilting decisively in Allied favor. The flow of men and material becomes increasingly secure. Meanwhile, on the Eastern Front, the war has reached industrialized slaughter. In August 1942, German forces advance toward the city of Stalingrad on the Volga River. The battle that follows becomes one of the deadliest in history. Street fighting reduces entire districts to rubble. Soviet resistance stiffens under General Georgy Zhukov's coordinated counteroffensive. In February 1943, the German Sixth Army surrenders. More than 250,000 Axis soldiers are killed, wounded, or captured. Stalingrad marks a strategic turning point. For the first time, a full German field army is destroyed. Yet at this moment, no large American ground army is fighting in Western Europe. The United States must first build experience. That begins in North Africa. In November 1942, Allied forces launch Operation Torch, landing in Morocco and Algeria. American troops encounter combat against Axis forces for the first time in significant numbers. Early engagements reveal inexperience. At the Battle of Kasserine Pass in February 1943, German Field Marshal Erwin Rommel exploits weaknesses in U.S. coordination and command. American forces suffer heavy losses, but adaptation is rapid. Leadership improves. Supply systems stabilize. Combined Allied pressure from British forces in Egypt and American forces in the West squeezes Axis armies in Tunisia. By May 1943, approximately 250,000 Axis troops surrender in North Africa, a defeat comparable in scale to Stalingrad. The Mediterranean opens. Allied forces invade Sicily in July 1943, then mainland Italy in September. Benito Mussolini is overthrown. Italy eventually surrenders, though German forces continue resisting across the Italian peninsula for nearly 2 years. The campaign is costly and slow. Mountainous terrain favors defense. Casualties mount steadily. At the same time, American industrial output transforms the Eastern Front. Through Lend-Lease, the Soviet Union receives over 400,000 trucks, 14,000 aircraft, 13,000 tanks, vast quantities of food, locomotives, rail track, and raw materials. While Soviet factories produce the majority of their own weapons, American logistics vehicles significantly enhance Red Army mobility during later offensives. By 1943, the global war map reveals distinct realities. In the East, the Soviet Union absorbs the bulk of German ground forces. Approximately 70 to 75% of German military casualties occur on the Eastern Front. Entire German armor divisions are destroyed in battles such as Kursk, the largest tank engagement in history, fought in July 1943. In the West and South, American and British forces prepare for a cross-channel invasion that has been promised since 1942 but repeatedly delayed. Soviet leadership grows impatient, demanding a second front to relieve pressure. Meanwhile, in the Pacific, the United States fights an entirely separate war. The Battle of Midway in June 1942 cripples Japan's carrier fleet. Island-hopping campaigns through Guadalcanal, the Gilberts, the Marshalls, and the Marianas follow. The Pacific theater becomes a war of attrition across vast ocean distances, requiring enormous naval and air resources. America is now fully committed, industrially, militarily, and psychologically. By 1944, more than 16 million Americans are in uniform. Casualties rise in every theater. Yet compared to the catastrophic losses suffered by the Soviet Union, over 8 million military dead and an estimated 19 million civilian deaths, the American experience remains numerically different. The continental United States is untouched by ground invasion. Its cities remain intact. Its industrial base expands rather than contracts. And yet, without that industrial base, Allied armies would lack fuel, ammunition, and mobility. By early 1944, two massive forces are converging toward the same enemy from opposite directions. In the east, Soviet armies push westward through Ukraine and Belarus. In the west, American and British forces assemble in southern England for the largest amphibious invasion in history. The decisive collision is approaching. But before that moment arrives, the question deepens. Was victory forged by manpower and sacrifice on the Eastern Front, or by industrial scale and strategic coordination across oceans? The answer lies in examining the war from multiple angles: human, technological, tactical, and political. June 1941 to May 1945. From the first day of Operation Barbarossa, the Eastern Front became the largest and bloodiest theater of the Second World War. It stretched from the Baltic Sea to the Black Sea, encompassing forests, plains, industrial cities, and frozen rivers. By sheer scale alone, it dwarfed every other front. At its height, Germany deployed over 3 million soldiers into the Soviet Union. By 1943, roughly 70% of all German divisions were fighting in the east. The majority of Germany's armored formations, the panzer divisions that had overrun Western Europe, were committed against the Red Army. The cost was staggering. The Soviet Union lost an estimated 8 to 11 million military personnel and approximately 19 million civilians. Entire cities, Leningrad, Stalingrad, Kiev, Minsk, endured sieges, starvation, mass deportations, and systematic destruction. The Battle of Stalingrad, fought from August 1942 to February 1943, marked a decisive shift. Germany's Sixth Army, once considered elite, was encircled and destroyed. The loss was not only military. It shattered the perception of German invincibility. Then came Kursk in July 1943, the largest tank battle in history. More than 6,000 armored vehicles clashed across open fields. German offensive capacity was permanently weakened. After Kursk, the Wehrmacht increasingly fought defensively in the east. By the time Allied forces landed in Normandy in June 1944, Germany had already suffered catastrophic losses in manpower and equipment. Soviet offensives in 1944, particularly Operation Bagration, annihilated German Army Group Center, eliminating approximately 28 divisions. The Eastern Front consumed the core of Hitler's military strength. This fact is not a matter of opinion. It is statistical reality. The majority of German combat casualties occurred in the East. Yet the Red Army did not fight alone in isolation. It fought with material support flowing from across the Atlantic: trucks, locomotives, communications equipment, aluminum, food rations, all of which enhanced operational mobility. Still, in raw blood cost and direct engagement, the Eastern battlefield bore the heaviest burden. And while Soviet soldiers advanced westward, another form of warfare was being waged, one less visible but equally decisive. Angle 2. The arsenal of democracy, industry as a weapon. Before a single American soldier stormed Omaha Beach, American factories had already altered the war's balance. In 1940, the United States ranked 18th globally in military size. By 1945, it fielded the most powerful industrial war machine in history. Production numbers alone illustrate the scale. Nearly 300,000 military aircraft built during the war. Over 88,000 tanks produced. Approximately 2.5 million trucks manufactured. More than 5,000 Liberty and Victory ships constructed to carry supplies across oceans. American industry did not merely equip its own forces. Through Lend-Lease, it supplied Britain, the Soviet Union, China, and other allied nations. To the Soviet Union alone, the United States delivered around 400,000 trucks and jeeps, over 13,000 tanks, 14,000 aircraft, 2,000 locomotives, and 11,000 railcars, millions of tons of food and raw materials. While Soviet factories produced the majority of Red Army weapons, particularly the T-34 tank, American trucks provided mobility during major offensives in 1944 and 1945. Soviet generals later acknowledged that these vehicles significantly improved logistical capacity. Meanwhile, American shipyards ensured Britain never starved into submission. Convoys crossing the Atlantic sustained the island nation through years of blockade attempts. The United States functioned as the connective tissue of the Allied war effort. Its homeland remained unbombed, its infrastructure intact, while European and Soviet industries were displaced, destroyed, or forced underground. American production expanded steadily. By 1944, the United States accounted for nearly half of global industrial output. War had become not only a matter of battlefield heroism, but of assembly lines, welding torches, and freight schedules. The Wehrmacht could replace tanks only so fast. The Allies could replace them faster. Yet industry requires secure transportation, and that opened another critical front. Angle 3. The Battle of the Atlantic, the war beneath the waves. If supplies cannot reach the battlefield, armies collapse. From 1939 to 1945, the Atlantic Ocean became a vast and continuous battleground. German U-boats targeted merchant convoys carrying fuel, ammunition, vehicles, and food. Their objective was strategic suffocation. In 1942 alone, U-boats sank over 1,600 Allied ships. The early months after America's entry into the war were particularly costly. Coastal cities along the United States witnessed oil tankers burning offshore. But the Allies adapted. Technological advances reshaped the struggle. Sonar, ASTIC, improved submarine detection. Radar enhanced nighttime interception. High-frequency direction, finding tracked enemy transmissions. Code-breaking efforts at Bletchley Park penetrated German naval communications. Long-range patrol aircraft closed the mid-Atlantic air gap. American shipyards replaced lost vessels faster than U-boats could sink them. Liberty ships were constructed in modular sections, drastically reducing build time. By mid-1943, the tide turned decisively. German submarine losses became unsustainable. Admiral Karl Donitz withdrew many U-boats from the Atlantic convoy routes. The success of the Atlantic campaign ensured that millions of tons of supplies reached Britain and the Soviet Union. It also enabled the mass deployment of American troops into Europe. Without control of the Atlantic, there would be no D-Day. Without secure sea lanes, the industrial advantage would remain theoretical. By 1944, the ocean, once contested, had become an Allied highway. Three realities now stand side by side. The Soviet Union absorbing the majority of German ground forces. The United States producing unprecedented quantities of war material. The Atlantic lifeline sustaining coalition warfare. Yet victory also depends on leadership decisions, battlefield coordination, and political memory. The story does not rest solely in numbers. It extends into Normandy's beaches, Pacific Islands, strategic conferences, and the shaping of post-war narratives. June 6, 1944. Before dawn, more than 150,000 Allied troops begin landing along the Normandy coast. The operation, codenamed Overlord, is the largest amphibious invasion in history. American, British, and Canadian forces assault 5 designated beaches. Omaha Beach becomes one of the most lethal sectors. Strong German defenses, high bluffs, and heavy machine gun fire inflict severe casualties in the opening hours. Approximately 2,400 American soldiers are killed, wounded, or missing on Omaha alone that day. But by nightfall, footholds are secured. The significance of D-Day is strategic rather than symbolic. It forces Germany to fight a sustained land war in Western Europe. Divisions that might have reinforced the Eastern Front are redirected to France. Air superiority, achieved through months of bombing campaigns against German industry and transportation networks, ensures Allied forces can build up strength across the Channel. Following the breakout from Normandy in July 1944, Allied armies advance rapidly across France. Paris is liberated on August 25th. By autumn, American forces approach Germany's western frontier, yet resistance stiffens. In December 1944, Germany launches the Ardennes Offensive, the Battle of the Bulge. It is Hitler's final major counteroffensive in the West. Poor weather initially limits Allied air support, allowing German armored units to penetrate American lines. The fighting is brutal and confused. Bastogne becomes a focal point. American forces hold despite encirclement. When skies clear, Allied air power resumes dominance. By January 1945, the offensive collapses. Germany has exhausted its remaining strategic reserves. The Western Front does not bear the same casualty scale as the Eastern Front. American military deaths in Europe total approximately 183,000. Soviet military deaths exceed 8 million. But the Western campaign is decisive in compressing Germany between two converging armies. By early 1945, the Wehrmacht fights on shrinking fronts with diminishing resources. Germany is no longer choosing where to defend. It is reacting everywhere. And while Europe closes in around Berlin, another vast campaign unfolds across the Pacific. Angle 5. The Pacific War, a separate and total struggle. The war against Japan follows a different geography and tempo. After the attack on Pearl Harbor, Japan advances rapidly across Southeast Asia, capturing the Philippines, Malaya, Singapore, and the Dutch East Indies. The objective is control of resource-rich territories, particularly oil. The turning point arrives in June 1942 at the Battle of Midway. American codebreakers identified Japan's planned attack. U.S. naval forces ambush the Japanese fleet, sinking 4 aircraft carriers. Japan's offensive capacity is severely weakened. From that point forward, the United States adopts an island-hopping strategy, capturing strategically valuable islands while bypassing heavily fortified positions. Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Saipan, Leyte Gulf, Iwo Jima, Okinawa. Each island represents a logistical and human ordeal. The Pacific War is marked by extreme conditions, tropical disease, entrenched defenses, and often refusal of surrender by Japanese forces. At Okinawa alone, fought from April to June 1945, over 12,000 Americans are killed and more than 100,000 Japanese soldiers die. Civilian casualties are immense. By mid-1945, American bombers strike Japanese cities with increasing intensity. Strategic firebombing devastates Tokyo and other urban centers. In August 1945, atomic bombs are dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Japan announces surrender on August 15th. The Pacific Theater consumes enormous American naval and air resources. It is largely fought without Soviet involvement until the final days of the war, when the Red Army invades Japanese-held Manchuria in August 1945. This dual war, Europe and the Pacific, divides American military attention but demonstrates its global reach. Yet military victories are only part of historical memory. What nations remember, and what they emphasize, often depends on what follows peace. Angle 6. The politics of credit, memory after victory. When the guns fall silent in May 1945 in Europe, a new tension begins. The alliance between the United States and the Soviet Union was always pragmatic, not ideological. Mutual survival bound them, but distrust lingered. The Yalta and Tehran conferences had already revealed strategic differences regarding post-war Europe. By 1946, Winston Churchill speaks of an iron curtain descending across the continent. The Cold War reshapes historical narrative. In the Soviet Union, victory over Nazi Germany becomes central to national identity. The Great Patriotic War. Monuments commemorate sacrifice on a scale unmatched elsewhere. The Eastern Front is remembered as the decisive arena where fascism was crushed. In the United States, the war is framed through images of Normandy, the liberation of Western Europe, and the Pacific campaigns. Hollywood films, veterans' memoirs, and public commemorations focus on American courage and technological strength. Neither narrative is entirely incorrect. Both are incomplete when isolated. Statistics remain clear. The Soviet Union bore the heaviest human losses. The United States supplied unparalleled industrial and logistical capacity. Britain maintained resistance during the war's darkest early years. Victory was cumulative. It required convergence. Yet after 1945, geopolitical rivalry encouraged simplified stories. Each superpower emphasized its own indispensability. As decades passed, the memory of who did more became entangled with ideological competition. By the time the Cold War hardened, cooperative victory had transformed into competing claims. And so the question endures, not only about military contribution, but about perception. Was America overshadowed in discussions of sacrifice? Or did post-war dominance amplify its role in global memory? To answer that, the decisive final phase of the war must be examined when the converging fronts finally collapsed into Berlin itself. November 28, 1943. Tehran. In a guarded embassy compound, three men sit at a long table. Franklin D. Roosevelt, Winston Churchill, and Joseph Stalin. Maps cover the walls. Colored pins mark advancing fronts. The question before them is no longer whether Germany will be defeated, but how and by whom. Stalin presses for urgency. The Red Army has absorbed unimaginable losses since 1941. Entire Soviet regions lie in ruin. He demands a full-scale Allied invasion of Western Europe to divide German strength. Roosevelt agrees. The cross-channel invasion will proceed in 1944. By spring, preparations in southern England reach staggering proportions. More than 2 million Allied troops assemble. 5,000 vessels gather along the coast. 11,000 aircraft prepare to dominate the skies. The deception campaign, Operation Bodyguard, convinces German command that the invasion will strike at Pas-de-Calais. June 6, 1944. Normandy is assaulted before dawn. While American forces fight inland from Omaha and Utah beaches, British and Canadian units push from Gold, Juno, and Sword. German high command hesitates to release armored reserves, uncertain whether Normandy is the main attack. Within weeks, the beachhead expands. But at the same moment, a second catastrophe unfolds for Germany in the east. June 22, 1944, exactly 3 years after Barbarossa, the Soviet Union launches Operation Bag Ration. From massive Soviet fronts, strike German Army Group Center in Belarus. The result is annihilation. Approximately 28 German divisions are destroyed or rendered combat ineffective. Estimates suggest over 300,000 German casualties in this single offensive. It is one of the most devastating defeats in German military history. The Wehrmacht now faces simultaneous existential threats. In France, Allied forces break out of Normandy in late July through Operation Cobra. German positions collapse. Paris is liberated in August. By September, Allied armies approach the German border. In the east, Soviet forces sweep through Poland, reaching the outskirts of Warsaw and pushing toward East Prussia. Germany's strategic position deteriorates rapidly. Fuel shortages intensify due to Allied bombing of synthetic oil facilities. Transportation networks are crippled. Rail lines are severed repeatedly. Luftwaffe presence dwindles as trained pilots and aircraft are lost faster than they can be replaced. Yet the war does not end immediately. In December 1944, Hitler gambles on one final offensive in the West, the Ardennes Offensive. He seeks to split Allied lines, capture Antwerp, and force a negotiated peace with Western powers before Soviet armies reach Berlin. The offensive begins on December 16th under heavy fog, limiting Allied air power. German forces initially achieve surprise. American units suffer severe pressure. Towns such as Bastogne become isolated. But German logistics falter. Fuel reserves are insufficient for sustained advance. Once skies clear, Allied aircraft strike relentlessly. By January 1945, the offensive collapses. Germany has expended its last strategic reserves in the West. Meanwhile, the Red Army resumes its winter offensive in January 1945. Soviet forces surge across the Vistula River, advancing nearly 300 miles in weeks. Warsaw falls. Budapest is encircled. By February, Soviet troops stand roughly 40 miles from Berlin. In the West, American forces cross the Rhine in March 1945. The Ludendorff Bridge at Remagen is captured intact on March 7th, providing an unexpected crossing point. Additional crossings follow under Operation Plunder. Germany's western defenses crumble. The Reich is now being crushed from both directions. Factories are rubble. Communications fragment. Civilian populations flee advancing armies. Hitler remains in Berlin, refusing evacuation. He issues orders to non-existent divisions. The question of who will capture the German capital becomes symbolic, not just military. Allied leaders had already agreed that Berlin would fall within the Soviet zone of occupation. Western armies halt along the Elbe River in April 1945. The final battle is imminent. Germany is no longer fighting for victory, it is fighting for delay. And in that narrowing space between two advancing forces, the war in Europe approaches its irreversible conclusion. April 16, 1945. Before dawn, more than 40,000 Soviet artillery guns open fire along the Oder River. The sky east of Berlin glows white. Marshal Georgy Zhukov commands the 1st Belarusian Front. To the south, Marshal Ivan Konyev advances with the 1st Ukrainian Front. Nearly 2.5 million Soviet troops converge on the German capital. Berlin is already encircled in all but name. Inside the city, remnants of the Wehrmacht SS units, Volkssturm militia, and teenage conscripts prepare defensive positions among shattered buildings. Ammunition is scarce. Fuel nearly gone. Communications unreliable. Hitler remains in the Führer bunker beneath the Reich Chancellery. He receives fragmented reports. Divisions he orders to counterattack no longer exist. The Battle of Berlin becomes a final, violent compression of a collapsing state. Street by street, Soviet infantry advance under cover of artillery and armored support. Bridges are destroyed. Subway tunnels flood. Civilian casualties mount as fighting moves through residential districts. By April 25th, Soviet forces link up at the Elbe River with American troops advancing from the west. The meeting is symbolic, photographed and publicized, but the operational lines remain clear. Berlin lies within the Soviet zone. April 30th, 1945. Adolf Hitler commits suicide in his bunker. His body is burned in the Chancellery Garden. The news spreads unevenly through German command structures. Some units continue fighting. Others attempt breakout or surrender. On May 2nd, Berlin surrenders to Soviet forces. Yet the war in Europe formally ends several days later. On May 7th, Germany signs an unconditional surrender at Reims, France. At Soviet insistence, a second signing occurs in Berlin on May 8th, ensuring acknowledgement of the Red Army's decisive role in capturing the capital. Victory in Europe Day follows. The final toll is immense. Approximately 5.3 million German military personnel are dead. Civilian casualties across Europe exceed tens of millions. Entire regions are depopulated or displaced. From a strictly military standpoint, Germany was defeated through cumulative pressure. The Red Army destroyed the majority of German ground forces in the east. Western Allied forces secured air superiority, strategic bombing dominance, and a second front that divided German resources. Allied naval supremacy ensured uninterrupted supply and reinforcement. No single blow ended the war. It was compression, sustained and multidirectional. Even as Berlin fell, the war against Japan continued. In the Pacific, American forces had captured Iwo Jima in March 1945 and Okinawa in June after months of intense fighting. Casualty projections for a direct invasion of Japan were severe on both sides. On August 6th and August 9th, 1945, atomic bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The Soviet Union declared war on Japan on August 8th and launched a rapid offensive in Manchuria against the Guangdong Army. On August 15th, Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's surrender. The formal signing occurred aboard USS Missouri on September 2nd, 1945. The Second World War was over. But the balance sheet of victory was uneven. The Soviet Union stood devastated, with entire cities in ruins and a generation lost. Western Europe was battered but rebuilding. The United States emerged with its industrial base intact, its economy expanded, and its military deployed across 2 oceans. In raw human loss, the Eastern Front had carried the heaviest burden. In industrial scale and global projection, the United States had mobilized beyond precedent. As celebrations faded, a new reality formed. The wartime alliance began dissolving into suspicion. Territories liberated by Soviet troops remained under Soviet influence. Western Europe leaned toward American reconstruction programs. The war had been fought together. The peace would not be. To understand whether America was robbed of its credit, the consequences of victory, economic, political, and psychological, must now be examined. May 1945. Europe lies in ruins. Cities smolder, rail lines are shattered, factories lie in rubble. Warsaw, Dresden, and Berlin bear the scars of relentless bombardment. Millions of civilians are displaced, wandering roads and refugee camps, carrying what little remains of their lives. The human cost is staggering. The Soviet Union, approximately 27 million dead, including over 8 million military personnel and nearly 19 million civilians. Germany, roughly 7 million dead, military and civilian combined. Poland, over 5 million dead, largely civilians. France, Britain, Italy, collectively hundreds of thousands killed, millions displaced. In contrast, the United States suffers around 418,000 military deaths, with relatively few civilian casualties. Its cities remain intact. Its factories are fully operational. Its workforce, now experienced in war production, emerges skilled and disciplined. This asymmetry shapes the post-war world. Politically, the Soviet Union consolidates control over Eastern Europe. Communist governments are installed in Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, and Bulgaria. Strategic cities, ports, and industrial regions fall under Moscow's influence. Stalin's Red Army occupies a vast portion of Central and Eastern Europe, ensuring security against any future German aggression. Western Europe turns to reconstruction, aided by American resources. Though devastated by German occupation and air raids, the infrastructure in countries like Britain, France, and Italy is rapidly restored with U.S. assistance. The Marshall Plan, though not yet announced in 1945, begins conceptualization during these months. Meanwhile, the U.S. military presence extends across both theaters. Troops occupy Germany, Japan, and various Pacific islands. Naval power projects influence across oceans. The United States transitions from a nation at war to a global hegemon with unparalleled industrial and military capacity. Yet this period also highlights tensions over recognition. The Soviet Union insists on emphasizing its sacrifices. Victory parades, monuments, and historical narratives center on the Great Patriotic War, underscoring the immense human and military cost borne by the USSR. In the United States, public memory celebrates decisive actions. Normandy landings, Pacific island hopping campaigns, strategic bombing, and the atomic bombings. Hollywood and literature create a heroic narrative of American intervention and ingenuity. Numbers alone, however, reveal the complexity. The Red Army bore the brunt of German manpower and battlefield losses. American industry supplied the Allies and sustained a global campaign. Britain survived early German offensives and contributed to both the Atlantic and Mediterranean theaters. Victory was not the result of a single actor. It was the convergence of multiple forces, each essential in its own sphere. Even so, the story of credit, who won, becomes a question not of combat effectiveness, but of perception and narrative shaping. This transition from wartime action to post-war memory sets the stage for the long shadow of the Cold War and the debate over recognition and historical justice. By late 1945, the world begins to take stock. The sheer scale of destruction prompts urgent rebuilding efforts. Cities across Europe face housing crises, destroyed infrastructure, and food shortages. Millions of refugees struggle to return home. In Germany, millions of displaced persons, prisoners of war, and civilians roam the countryside, creating one of history's largest humanitarian challenges. The human cost frames global politics. The Soviet Union, despite staggering losses, emerges territorially secure and militarily powerful. Its influence stretches from the Baltic to the Black Sea. Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Romania, and Bulgaria fall into its sphere. Berlin is divided, a symbol of both military victory and emerging tension. Western Europe, meanwhile, relies heavily on American economic and logistical support. The United States provides food, raw materials, and technical expertise to stabilize governments, restore infrastructure, and rekindle industrial production. American banks finance recovery, and U.S. companies expand their influence abroad. The seeds of the Marshall Plan are already in discussion. Globally, the United States emerges as a superpower with unmatched industrial capacity, nuclear capability, and global military reach. Its economy is strengthened, its workforce experienced, and its political influence worldwide. The Pacific theater further amplifies its position. Japan's surrender establishes American occupation, reforms, and influence over East Asia. Yet historical credit becomes contested. Soviet historians emphasize the Eastern Front, the battles of Stalingrad, Kursk, and the March to Berlin. The narrative portrays the Red Army as the decisive force against Germany, a viewpoint reinforced through state-controlled media, monuments, and education. American narratives, by contrast, focus on operational precision, technological achievement, and strategic planning. D-Day, the Rhine crossings, the island-hopping campaigns, and the atomic bombings. Hollywood immortalizes American heroism, influencing generations of public perception. The divergence of narratives is compounded by the Cold War. Both superpowers shape collective memory to assert moral and military preeminence. The reality of shared sacrifice, the interdependence of Soviet manpower, British resistance, and American production, becomes simplified or politicized in historical accounts. In strategic terms, the war transforms military doctrine and international relations. Mechanized and combined arms warfare, perfected on the Eastern Front, influences post-war military planning worldwide. American industrial capacity becomes a cornerstone of U.S. global influence, reinforcing the doctrine that economic and logistical superiority is a form of strategic dominance. Allied coordination demonstrates the importance of multinational planning, intelligence sharing, and technological integration. Culturally, memory diverges. In Europe, physical destruction and population loss dominate collective consciousness. In the United States, absence of homeland destruction allows for a narrative centered on heroic intervention and global liberation. By the early 1950s, the who deserves credit debate is already embedded in politics, textbooks, and public discourse. Soviet achievements are celebrated in the Eastern Bloc. American contributions, meanwhile, are highlighted in the West and in global reconstruction narratives. The war's aftermath, then, is not merely a matter of counting tanks or casualties. It is about recognition, narrative control, and the intersection of power, memory, and influence. The stage is set for reflection. What does it mean, decades later, to ask whether America was robbed of its credit? And what does this tell us about the way humanity interprets shared sacrifice, global strategy, and historical justice? History rarely presents simple answers. Victory in the Second World War was neither singular nor unilateral. It was forged in the snow of Stalingrad, on the beaches of Normandy, in the shipyards of the United States, and across the endless expanse of the Pacific. Millions perished, armies were destroyed, cities reduced to rubble. Yet the outcomes depended not only on courage and endurance, but on logistics, industrial capacity, and strategic coordination. The Red Army bore the heaviest human burden. American industry sustained the global fight. Britain endured when hope seemed faintest. Credit, then, is less a measure of who did more than a reflection of perspective. In the decades after the war, political narratives shaped memory. The Soviet Union emphasized sacrifice and conquest in the East. The United States highlighted innovation, strategy, and global reach. Each narrative served a purpose: to honor, to justify, to instruct. But when the dust settles and numbers are weighed against human stories, the truth is complex. America was not robbed of credit, nor did it fight alone. Victory was cumulative, multidimensional, and interdependent. The war reminds us that history is rarely a contest of simple heroism. It is a convergence of human endurance, technological power, and circumstance. In the end, the story of World War II is a story of humanity, its capacity for destruction, resilience, and cooperation. To ask who deserves credit is to ask something deeper: how we remember and what lessons we carry forward from the greatest conflict the world has ever known. History, like the war itself, belongs to all who lived it, fought it, and survived it, across every front, in every nation, and in every memory that endures.